in order to do this, we need to first understand the things that we'll need to be measuring and collecting as part of the data collection process. And so let's take a look at some of these in more detail. The first thing we need to know is the earned value. And the earned value for the test is simply the percent complete times its original budget. So what we'll do is we'll, from the field, get an indication on how much of the project activity has been done, and then based on the total value for that activity, or the total planned value, if you will, times the percent complete, we'll figure out from that how much we've earned, how much of the project value we've earned on that activity. The planned value is the time phase baseline of the value of the work scheduled. And so in this particular case, if we have a 4-day duration activity, that's $400, and we were going to deploy that on $100 per day, on a $100 per day basis, the planned value after 2 days would be $200. Now, its earned value would be based on how much of that work's been done. AC is the actual cost of the work complete. I think that's pretty obvious. So those are the three parameters, and notice that we're getting those three from three different sources. The earned value is coming from a report out in the field or through some earned value set of rules based on the percent of the work that's been completed on an activity. The planned value is off your baseline budget, and it's based on where you're at in time, at that point in time in the plan. And then your actual cost is what's been billed to the account numbers through your accounting and financial system, really coming from a third independent source. So given those three data points, we can calculate things like the cost variance, the schedule variance, the budgeted cost at completion, estimated cost at completion, estimated cost to complete the remaining work, and cost variances. We'll look at these in a little more detail in the next slide and actually how we calculate those. Here's a slide with some of these things in more detail. Again, I want to pay specific attention to the planned value because we throw around two different terms for PV. We have the planned value for the complete activity and the planned value for the overall budget, but this particular PV is always, always, always just that amount of duration of that activity and the cost for the duration to date. So just be careful when you're using PV in the equation that you're using the right PV. I tend to call this PVA versus PVT, which is the total planned value for an activity. I've tried to distinguish between the two. So when we get down to calculating some of these parameters, let's look at the cost parameters first. We have a cost variance, which is simply earned value minus actual cost. Of course, a negative number there indicates that you're over budget. A positive number indicates under budget. A cost performance index, which is the earned value over the actual cost. The CPI is a performance index, so that a value of 1 is an indication of things are steady. A value less than 1 indicates cost overruns. A value of greater than 1 indicates that you're saving some money along the way. One way of thinking about the cost performance index is in terms of dollars. And if you have a CPI of 0.90, what it says is you're only earning 90 cents of planned work for each dollar you spend. So it's kind of an efficiency thing. Take a look down the list at all the rest of these indices and pay particular attention to schedule variance, and we'll be talking about that as we go through an example problem as well. Let's take a look at these steps that we've used, or have already started, and we'll use to take a further look at an examination of what's going on with the project. So of course we've gone through and defined our work breakdown structure and done all that good stuff and developed our work schedules and assigned our resources. And step 3, we assume we've developed a time phase budget, and so we know how we're going to deploy the resources and consequently where our dollars are going to be needed and when. So at the work package level, we're going to have to actually calculate those actual costs for the work performed, and hopefully we have a robust accounting system that will do that for us. And then for the work actually performed, we'll have to somehow assess what the percent complete of that is, and again using sometimes earned value rules or some other process that you establish for your organization for that. And then from that we can then compute the schedule variance and the cost variance, kind of the basic information we need to see what's going on with the project. In order to do this evaluation, we first need to establish a project baseline. And the purpose of the baseline is pretty clear. It's that anchor point for measuring performance. We'll look at planned cost against the scheduled work, and from that be able to measure any of the variances of what's going on. What type of things do we include in our baseline? Well, it's everything. It's the labor, the equipment, materials, and project direct overhead costs. The indirect overhead we leave out of this because, of course, that's brought to us on a daily basis based on how long the project is ongoing, and it's really a separate measure and has no indication of where the project itself is performing. So how are we going to deploy our individual costs? Well, the costs are supposed to be placed exactly as they're expected to be earned so that we can track them from their point of origin. So we need to understand where our specific activities are going to be done, when they're going to be done, who's going to do them, and when there's an expectation of cost being incurred. And then we'll apply some set of rules, whether it's a percent complete rule or some other earned value rule, to assign those costs as the work gets done. Here's some of the stuff we can do with this information. We can do some various variance analysis. We can look at earned values between what we expected in the schedule and their actual costs, and we can ultimately assess the status of the project with that information using the planned value, the earned value, and the actual costs. And from that information, get a sense on what's going on. Negative variances are bad, positive variance being good in general, but we always need to understand where those variances are at and what activities are impacted. In the previous slide, I talked about the cost variance and the schedule variance. So let's talk about that one more time here. The cost variance indicates if the work accomplished using labor and material costs more or less than was planned at any point on the project. So a positive variance means that we're ahead of the plan, and negative variance means we're behind in our plan of our deployed costs. While the schedule variance presents an overall assessment in dollar terms of the progress of all the work packages either in progress or completed to date. You'll get a dollar value out of that, but you will not get a date. So you will need other information to determine if you in fact are off schedule on the overall completion of the project, or if it's just something on a particular activity that has slack associated with it. Let's take a look at the cost schedule graph here. And in this graph, we've plotted actual costs, our planned value or baseline cost, and our earned value. And what you can see from this is the variance, how the variances are represented graphically. You can see the schedule variance is simply the earned value, the difference between the earned value and the planned value, and the cost variance is the difference between the earned value and the actual cost. And so it's really the gap between those plots. The planned value at the completion of the project is the budgeted at completion cost, and while the at schedule end, the actual cost comes into the EAC, or the earned actual cost for the project. For those that like to see graphs and can visualize this, you can, just by the position of the planned value, the earned value, and the actual cost curves, you can get a sense right away whether the project is behind in terms of cost or behind in terms of schedule from a dollar perspective, or whether they're ahead or whether one is ahead or one behind. It all depends on the relative position of the three curves with respect to each other. And this slide here represents the four different possibilities for schedule variance and cost variance.